Let's imagine a demonstration in Moscow on Red Square. 1,000 people come out with signs saying, "Putin, get out, tyrant, die," where the banners say, "You're worse than a dog." How long do you think these people would be able to carry their banners and, let's say, flags of the United States of America on Red Square? And now Kyiv, Kreshchatyk, or Maidan, the parents of children who have been killed or are fighting. Banners saying the war is only needed by thieves in the government. Down with Zelensky. Corrupt officials should be executed. Remove censorship from our... and so on. I think they would have somewhere between 15 and 45 minutes for half of them to end up in jail. Well, those who later posted the image of this on social networks would be arrested, just like those who were arrested before, and some disappeared. Iran has already shown how a dictatorial regime, a truly dictatorial regime where the servants of the people feel like kings, melts down when the people take to the streets and protest. Between 30,000 and 35,000 protesters were killed by direct fire on the demonstrators. You probably expected that in a country with the most terrible dictatorship in the world, in a country ruled by a king named Trump, a tyrant, a madman, where there is not an ounce of freedom and it takes incredible civil courage to protest, people still take to the streets. Farewell, drinking tea with their children, crying and sobbing, yet they still go out because they can't resist. Many have been killed, shot down. Those who tried to talk about this event on social media, how many people have been deprived of their freedom? Their relatives were put under a constant wiretapping and surveillance. So how many of you think this way? Ladies and gentlemen, and who among you thought that the mass popular protests called "We Have No Kings" or "No Kings" would lead to the overthrow of the usurper regime that deceived the people and falsified the election results? Well, I ended up in the White House, and he is pursuing the most aggressive policy toward the residents of his own country ever seen on the American continent. The most aggressive. Well, just imagine that. You're watching the news or scrolling your feed on a quiet Saturday night, waiting, of course, for the usual stream of triumphant headlines from legacy media about how tens of millions of outraged, indignant Americans took to the streets and finally overthrew the tyrannical Trump administration in a grand, nonviolent uprising of democracy. That's exactly what they've been promising all week, right? Thousands and thousands of No Kings rallies across the country, the largest protest in modern American history. But then the real footage starts coming in. And instead of a grand revolution, instead of a powerful wave of angry Americans demanding justice, you see elderly white liberals with pre-printed signs, Antifa masks, and, oh joy to my heart, communist flags with a hammer and sickle, and even someone spraying the words "Kill your local ICE agent" on a federal building. Well, I mean a police officer, right? And you suddenly realize that this isn't a movement, it's a nervous breakdown.
Biosa. This weekend, the world watched in horror as the far left desperately tried for the third time to organize a massive, united, and of course, absolutely organic, unpaid, not externally funded protest. No King's Day across the country. Well, what the organizers promised would be a tectonic shift in American politics, a mobilization of millions at 3,300 events in all 50 states, turned out to be what can only be described as the political equivalent of a far-left student party that ended with the police being called. In Los Angeles, the leftists from No Kings started breaking up concrete blocks and stuffing them into their pockets before moving toward the federal DHS agents. Protesters were attacking federal law enforcement officers, literally with concrete blocks. Moreover, some lunatic even spray-painted "Kill your local ICE agent" on a federal building. And in the end, there were dozens of arrests. These were scenes from Portland, can you imagine? Law enforcement followed a zero-tolerance policy toward violence and cracked down hard on these protesters, which became a pattern repeated in all cities across the country. Law enforcement was not going to tolerate any nonsense. As I said earlier, this is not a movement. This is a collapse. This is a collective collapse of some of the most neurotic people on the planet. Welcome to the spectacular, chaotic, and self-destructive disaster called No Kings 3.0. This is probably my favorite photo of the day. Here is a liberal white woman who probably lives alone with her cats. And look at her sign. Oh, sorry, let me correct myself. She lives alone with her dog. My dog is smarter than Trump. The word then will be spelled out letter by letter.
Here is probably my favorite photo of the day. A white liberal woman who most likely lives alone with a dog and her sign. My dog is smarter than Trump. Ladies and gentlemen, just to be clear, the word should be than, not then, not with the letter E, but with the letter A. This is the Democratic Party today. Not only do they not know how to spell a word at a basic level, how to write a word, how or how, and they don't even check it. No one said it better than Scott Jennings. He's one of, well, let's say the stars of today's television. Listen, they invited him on CNN to have a bit of balance, so to speak. And there, the balance shifted so much toward conservatism and the Republicans that he overshadows all the other hosts put together. So he said, I saw people with the hammer and sickle flags in New York, Hezbollah flags, Hamas flags, Palestinian flags, weird liberal boomer signs. Well, boomer is my age, right? That's pretty representative of the Democratic coalition. And it's them, they're the ones funding this, by the way. You mean the boomer, right? Well, okay. In a country ruled by a dictatorial king, isn't there a bit too much freedom of speech? One account on X said 9 million people, but X, as they say, participated in protests against Trump. Not a single protester was killed. Millions of Iranians protested against the Ayatollah, and 30,000 were killed, shot by snipers, hanged on cranes. Do you see the difference? More and more people are noticing the absurd contradiction of these rallies, especially those where the flags of the true tyrannical regime are waved. Responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, the flags of S, with the hammer and sickle.
This says a lot about the Democratic coalition, by the way, and its financiers. If America examines this and asks what the two parties represent, they see it in the principle of rejecting kings.
I think if you Americans...
The very fact that people can protest so freely in the street completely disproves what they are supposedly protesting against. They contradict their own words by the very act of saying them. The nationwide protests under the slogan "No Kings" that swept across the U.S. on Saturday are not a spontaneous grassroots movement. According to a Fox News investigation, there is a coordinated network behind them, about 100 organizations with a combined annual budget of around $3 billion. The official coordinator of the flagship march in St. Paul, Minnesota, was the organization Indivisible, a major Democratic lobbying organization that is funded, well, of course, by George Soros. However, the key player behind the scenes turned out to be Neville Roy Singham, an American technology magnate who now lives in Shanghai, China, a staunch communist, and the main sponsor of an extensive network of radical socialist and communist organizations in the U.S.
A lot of freedom of speech for a monarchy. Now that's freedom of speech. And you know, I'll tell you this. Bingo! Scott hit the nail right on the head. Bingo! There's so much freedom of speech there, right? In a country ruled by a dictatorial king. Isn't that so?
But if in the United States of America anyone can go out to the square or the street and shout that they want to overthrow the ruler, the tyrant, and nothing will happen to them for it, that's just nonsense. If you protest against the infringement of your freedom, but the very fact of your protest shows that your freedom is not being infringed, then what's the point of bringing millions of people out into the streets? Someone needs this. Who is capable of doing this? Who is behind these protests? Who is financing them? Who is organizing them?
So with all these ostentatious contradictory antics, what the hell is really going on here? So besides the NGOs funded by Soros, what is really driving these wealthy white boomers to do such absurd things? A New York psychologist has an interesting perspective on this, and it will absolutely blow your mind. A New York psychotherapist named Jonathan Alpert, who wrote an article critically analyzing the recent No Kings rally a few months ago, reappeared this weekend and gave a rather fascinating assessment of everything that happened. He really confirms that many of the participants in these rallies suffer from neurosis. The people who came out, many of them elderly, many retirees, admitted on camera that they couldn't enjoy their vacation. They couldn't enjoy time with their family or loved ones. All because of their psychotic obsession with Donald Trump. And that's why the psychologists claim that these people aren't protesting, they're self-medicating. Isn't that interesting? They're not protesting, they're numbing themselves, they're using a political rally. Just like an addict uses a substance for temporary relief, for a dopamine hit from collective resentment, for the illusion that they're doing something meaningful while their movement quietly collapses around them. And for me, what's most striking about this analysis is that the psychologist defined politics as a kind of religion for these protesters, right? Politics has become the new religion for the radical left, and in many ways, I have to admit, there it is right in front of you. That's the whole point in a nutshell, isn't it? When you strip the world of the transcendent, when you secularize absolutely everything, that's what the modern world has been trying to do for the past century. When you push churches into the private sphere, the public space itself becomes sacred, the government becomes your new church, and politics becomes your new evangelical religion. And now the political enemy is demonized, and your protests become an evangelical gathering, but instead of hope, transformation, and grace, you are basically left with the good old pagan calls for human sacrifice.
We've been saying for a long time that what's happening is already a religion because it's impossible to reach people or prove anything to them once they've believed. Notice they believed. They didn't learn it, didn't check it, didn't verify it. They believed, and now they believe. So no matter what you tell them, no matter what facts you present, it just can't get through to them. It won't move them from their position. It won't convince them. Believe me, I've tried. I showed them 100% proof, which made absolutely no impression. And even if the person was forced to agree with me during the conversation, the next day I would hear from him a complete repetition of what he had told me before. And he completely forgot that he had said, "Yes, you are right. Of course, that's nonsense. Of course, that's not true." Exactly a second after he said it, his belief returned again. His belief would return to him, and any memory of any inconvenient facts or evidence would dissolve and disappear. But besides belief, there is also a technical component called funding. Someone had to plan, organize, prepare, and carry out a massive campaign in a huge number of cities. This requires very serious organization, very serious funding. So who is really behind these protests? Who needs this? So, Indivisible, as I told you, is a national political organization with serious resources funded by Soros. It is the one listed on the permit for holding the flagship march in Minnesota. The organization positions itself as a kind of democratic advocacy group that simply coordinates its actions with radical left-wing groups. And here's the main point. The instigator of these radical left-wing groups, the person I already mentioned, Neville Royce Singham. He was born in 1954 in Midtown, Connecticut, into the family of a Marxist-Leninist, as he says, scholar. In his youth, he joined the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Well, he is, Indian, Pakistani, not black. He worked at the Chrysler plant in Detroit, where the FBI listed him as potentially dangerous. In the 1990s, he built a technology company called ThoughtWorks, which he sold in 2017 for almost $800 million. The money he made became the fuel for a revolutionary network. Today, Singham lives in Shanghai and is a supporter and promoter of Mao Zedong's ideas. A co-founder of the American organization Code Pink and former campaign manager for Jerry Brown, she married in 2017 Singham in Jamaica. The wedding became a founding Congress. 4 days of lectures, dancing, and late-night conversations about People's War, Mao's term. Singham calls her charming, his bride, his wife, a charming troublemaker. Fox News tracked 223 transactions totaling $591 million, passing through 5 continents from 2017 to 2020. That's only what they found. According to U.S. national experts, the ultimate goal of the network is not to achieve specific political reforms within the U.S., but to weaken American society as a system in the long term. And I have to say, they've had significant success. The model reproduces Mao's doctrine of People's War, a decentralized network,
Идеологическое воспитание.
and with the mobilization of civilian institutions without direct military confrontation. The No Kings protests are a classic example of what, well, Hayek, I've mentioned him many times, he's a philosopher, called the road to serfdom. While declaring a fight against tyrants, the movement serves the interests of the most tyrannical and totalitarian system on the planet, the Communist Party of China. We fight tyranny by spreading the ideas of tyranny. For a thinking person, the main task is to figure out who, in fact, is paying for this show.
For those of you who didn't know about Nick Shirley before he exposed major fraud in Minnesota just the other day, listen to what he said to President Trump 3 months ago.
Yes, my name is Nick Shirley. I'm 23 years old. I'm a completely independent YouTube journalist, and over the past year or so, I've been able to visit 15 countries. I've talked to people in gangs in Brazil, in the favelas, in prisons, but still, the most dangerous places I've been were here in the United States, unfortunately. I had the chance to show people the Antifa protests in the United States, and there's nothing natural about their actions here. I've seen people being brought in by buses from different countries. I've seen the same woman from the protest in Atlanta being brought to the protest in Washington, and then to New York. There's nothing honest about what they're doing, and they have their own signs. I've seen the exact same signs here in Washington and in London too. It's a big organization and a whole corporation that they run. People may ask, what threatens us as Americans if we go? You'll be called a fascist or Nazi, and they'll wish death on you, as they did on me. And just last week in Portland, Oregon, I saw a woman trapped in her car, surrounded by Antifa. Her sister wrote to me after seeing the video. She said, "The only reason I think my sister was safe is because you were there recording. I was also chased off by an Antifa member who said he would smoke me out. And in the next moment, he saw that a DHS sniper had laser sights pointed at his chest. If he wasn't there, who knows what might have happened." These people are very dangerous, and people wonder, how do they do it? The reason is that these cities don't enforce the law. And why should these people worry if the law isn't being enforced? And we're not far right, and we're not mistaken. We're just right. And the truth about what's happening here in America with these groups is very dangerous. And I thank you, Mr. President, and your administration for recognizing this.
Thank you very much. It's a shame you have to go through this, but thank you very much. Yes, you will get to the bottom of it, so this is a very important thing you're doing. Thank you very much.
Actually, he is very eloquent. If you listen to his interview, he recently did a great one with Patrick Bet-David. Basically, what Nick Shirley is saying here is, I've seen a lot in my lifetime, and we're facing not only external enemies, but also internal ones. And they are ruthless, and they are real, and they are bloodthirsty. I personally remember I've had confrontations with Antifa in the past, and they attacked me saying they wanted to kill me. These are not people who act for the common good. They are bloodthirsty. We need to pray for Nick Shirley. We need to pray that more brave citizen journalists will stand up, and that our administration under President Trump will be brave and visionary enough to put an end to this crime and violence. America needs peace. America longs for peace. And future generations deserve peace.
Let's move on to the news for a minute. I'll talk about major changes on the fronts. But first, a few announcements. Trump wrote on Truth Social that the U.S. is having serious negotiations with a new, more reasonable regime to complete the operation naturally in Iran. At the same time, he threatened, if a deal is not reached, the Hormuz Strait will not be opened, and the U.S. will destroy Iranian power plants, oil wells, and Kark Island. According to Trump, there are already 50,000 American servicemen in the region. The Houthis, for the first time since the beginning of the war, launched 2 missiles, At Israel, naturally. Both were intercepted. According to the Institute for the Study of War, from February 24 to March 24, 2026, which is 1 month, Russia did not capture but lost 4 square miles of Ukrainian territory. Lost. A good spring offensive. According to Zelensky, Ukrainian intelligence determined that Russia photographed the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia 3 times, using its satellites on the day before the Iranian attack on the facility, during which American servicemen were injured. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't understand why only Ukrainian intelligence found out about this, but to be honest, even without Ukrainian intelligence, I'm almost sure that's how it was. Trump said in an interview with the Financial Times that he intends to take Iran's oil, and he is considering seizing Kark Island, through which 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. Maybe we'll seize Kark, maybe we won't. We actually have a lot of options, Trump said. He also stated that in Iran, as he said, there are about 3,000 targets for bombing. So it seems like we've already hit 10,000. That's just the United States of America, so our goal was 13,000. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more, I don't know. According to Trump, Iran agreed with Germany on most of the 15 points of American demands to end the war. These are the ones that were passed through Pakistan. He expressed confidence that the deal is close. Meanwhile, Iran rejected this interpretation. The Speaker of the Irish Parliament, that's Galabov, I told you about him before, accused the U.S. of secretly preparing a ground invasion. How can you secretly prepare something if the president of the country says 24 times that we're planning to invade? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Honestly, for some reason, I intuitively trust the Iranian interpretation more in this particular case. There are too many hotheads there who demand blood, and then more blood. And just like the Ukrainian leaders, they absolutely don't care about what's happening to the country's population. That is, with those very people, the nation, whom they were supposed to protect. And now, let's give the floor to General Kin.
That's how a president negotiates, isn't it? He says what he wants, and then he declares, I'm under pressure.
So what do you think? Is the deal close? Well, I think what he's doing, obviously, is using leverage. He's very good at using it, and that's what he's applying here. But essentially, this whole operation that we're conducting right now is in itself a powerful source of leverage. I strongly suspect that we won't be able to make any deal, considering who the Iranians are and what their true nature is. What? To make a deal, they would have to give us all their capabilities. Pretty much everything. Everything we're going to physically take from them, and I don't think that's going to happen for them. Actually, I still prefer a military solution anyway.
So the military operation would be to go in and take the uranium they have, that enriched uranium, go in, take it, and get it out of there. And or occupy Kark Island and completely disrupt their oil and energy operations. That would be, the military operation would be, yes.
The military operation is aimed at destroying as much of their ballistic missile arsenal as possible from the air. We've already made significant progress. Secondly, their drones, their industrial base, which we've been working very hard on this weekend. In other words, this is about future potential. Yes, to destroy the remnants of their nuclear program. If we can destroy it from the air, great. If not, we may have to conduct a ground operation to carry out this mission on the ground temporarily. And then, our other task is to open the Strait of Hormuz and keep it open. That's exactly what we're going to do. And I believe we are fully capable of achieving all of this. The main advantage of a military operation over diplomacy is that as soon as we make some kind of deal with the Iranians, let's say they give in on everything I just mentioned, what will they want first of all? Lifting of sanctions, yes, unfreezing of frozen assets. Then we pour billions of dollars into this regime and we restore it, and it will last for many more years. And at some point, what will they do? They will go right back to what they were doing after the 12-day war. They will resume developing ballistic missiles and nuclear technology. They started transferring money to their puppets through other networks, other banks this time, through Istanbul. They haven't changed at all. This is exactly what motivated Netanyahu and Trump. They looked at this and said, oh God, they aren't changing at all. How far they were set back during that 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer, which seriously undermined their nuclear potential. They immediately return to their original goals. And that's exactly what will probably happen if capital is injected into the regime as a result of a deal.
Now let's imagine for a minute that we declare the war over and say we've accomplished what we came to do. The United States of America and Israel leave, leaving the regime untouched and encouraged by what they would consider their victory.
But the situation is much more serious if we allow this regime to move forward. They want long-range ballistic missiles with greater range than they currently have and the nuclear weapons they truly want. This is unacceptable, and we must acknowledge the reality of it. When you try to prevent something, it's harder than dealing with something that has already happened. And we are trying to prevent something bad.
And what have Iranian leaders said about America and what they will do if and when they get the chance to attack? To attack America. For more than 2 decades, Khomeini repeated daily, several times, "Death to America." And during the nuclear deal negotiations, he came out to the crowd and shouted, "Death to America, death." The crowd erupted in enthusiastic cheers. You know, I once gave an example saying that, let's say a neighbor lives behind a fence, and every day he shouts over the fence that as soon as he saves up enough money to buy a gun and some bullets, he will immediately kill your children. This example can be applied exactly here. As soon as they have the opportunity, the Iranians said, "We will destroy Israel and try to cause as much harm and evil as possible to the United States of America, at least to their leaders." Well, for example, we'll nuke Washington. When you fire up the people every day for decades, they stop thinking they're charged with a single idea, namely to harm America. Well, Israel and America. That's exactly how it is in Gaza and on the West Bank. 4- and 5-year-old children dressed in military uniforms and given toy guns shout, "Death to Jews, death to Jews, death to America," and so on. They all shout it together. They really like doing it together. They remember for the rest of their lives how good it felt at that moment when they shouted, "Death to Jews, death to America." Do you think you could persuade them of anything using the logic of Sophocles or Aristotle? July 2015. 4 days after the nuclear deal was signed, the humanist said, "Did you hear? Death to Israel, death to the USA." The whole nation was shaken by these slogans. And furthermore, the Islamic Republic of Iran will not abandon its support for its friends in the region. They mean terrorists. Our policy will not change toward the arrogant American government. This was said immediately after the agreement was signed. November 2015. This is the official transcript from Khomeini's website. You should know that your slogan, "Death to America," and the cry of the Iranian people have a rational and powerful foundation. February 2019, on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, Khomeini stated that the slogan, "Death to America," means death to the leaders of the United States, Trump, John Bolton, and Pompeo. For some reason, he singled out these three. He added, "This means death to the rulers of America. The Iranian people will not stop saying death to America." May 2025. Khomeini stated, "Death to America," and now he added, "Death to England." Then he thought and added, "And of course, death to Israel." I say, death to the infidels. Well, that is, it's not correct. But really, it's not correct. And the Chinese didn't provoke any fits of rage in him.
In fact, our planning regarding this regime began when they came to power. And when they first killed more than 300 of our people in 1983 when Reagan was president, blew up 2 embassies and our Marine barracks, we realized that we were dealing with an adversary. So even in those very early days, Central Command began planning a war with Iran, taking into account everything they had already done to us. And after that, they continued to kill us. What sets President Trump apart from those 7 previous presidents is that although many of them dealt with Iran, which was killing Americans, all 7 of those presidents faced their overall aggression and destabilization. And none of them was ever truly ready to confront them in any meaningful way. And I really like what you say in the introduction. President Trump is trying to put an end to this 47-year experience. That's the purpose of what's happening here. And why? Motivation. After the 12-day war, there was a strong motivation to include the destruction of their nuclear capability in this. Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, relying on their intelligence services, realized that Iran has reaffirmed its commitment to all its previous goals. And this included the development of missile weapons, active assistance from China, an increase in the number of drones, and the restoration of their nuclear program. And finally, the fourth point, they continued to finance their puppet groups. They used various banks for this, funneled money through Istanbul, hundreds of millions of dollars, but nothing changed. On the contrary, they only became even more entrenched in their goals. And they realized we have to do something about this. We can't wait because they are developing ballistic missiles with greater range and more destructive power, restoring their nuclear program with an obvious potential for use, and this created a sense of urgency. And then they looked at the Central Command commander, they looked at the IDF commander, and they pulled out old plans that already existed and had existed for years.
Exactly. That's what the Americans still don't understand. That the Iranian mullahs, European globalists, Chinese communists, Latin American anti-colonialists, and all of these, they are all links in the same chain. How, you may ask, did liberal progressives and Islamic jihadists find something in common and unite in the struggle? The thing is, both of them hate to see freedom, no matter what they tell you. There are only two ways people can relate to one another in the world. One is when every person has freedom, the freedom to do and say whatever they want, the freedom to make and sell anything you want, the freedom, let's say, to do whatever you want with the results of your own work. The only thing that limits this freedom is that it cannot violate the freedom of others. Everyone is 100% free, and not even by 1% does anyone have the right to interfere with another's freedom. Any other way of existence is slavery. In some cultures, you are a slave, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In other societies, you are a slave for as long as you are producing something. In a third kind, you're only a part-time slave. Say you work 40 hours a week, right? And then you got paid for 20 hours, and for the other 20 hours you gave your earnings to someone else. You'll be punished if you don't give it. Or, for example, you posted a message, "I want a social network." Then someone came along, took it down, and banned you or the message or whatever because he or someone else didn't like it. So that's really not freedom at all. And the difference between one society and another is only in how much or what percentage of the time you are a slave, and what percentage of your time you are relatively free. Well, why relatively? Because at any moment, those who run society can decide that now you'll be a slave for longer. In a sense, naive Americans, born in a society created as a free society for free people, kind of understand intellectually that it's not the same in other places, but they just can't imagine it. And when they draw some conclusions, they still base them on the idea that people probably want more or less the same things all over the world. So Americans think it must be freedom, but that's not the case. I would even say that those who truly want freedom are quite unique individuals. Because most people on the planet, when they say they want freedom, what they really mean is that they don't want to be bossed around. They want to be the ones in charge. That is, let's say they don't want to be complete or partial slaves, but to be slave owners. Not to be whipped themselves, but to have the whip in their own hands. And here the anti-imperialists and everyone else who insists that the needs of society should oblige individualists, individual members of society, to do anything for the sake of that very society. They truly hate only those who want to be free. Free from them, free from society, free from their obligations, free from everything. Of course, they hate each other too, but much less because they understand each other. One group wants to force another group or the rest of the country's population to act in a certain way. For example, they want everyone to pray to Allah. That's one group, yes. Globalists want everyone to pray to global warming, or maybe they'll switch their tune to global cooling. Communists are absolutely the most honest people. They're atheists. They want everyone to pray to them. The only ones who just want to be left alone say, "We'll do whatever we want, and you do whatever you want, with one condition: don't interfere with each other." Don't interfere with each other when the other person wants to do something. Easy to say, but incredibly hard to do. And those are exactly the people I mean. There are very few of them. Protests against kings, clearly clumsily rigged. A promise to kill America, whatever that means. Hatred of Trump, it all fits into the same picture. The rejection of that great experiment begun by the founding fathers of the United States of America. The very reason why you and I, ladies and gentlemen, wanted so much to be part of this great country. And that's why the day we received our citizenship was so important to us. That's all. Long live the kings. We are with you, every single one of us. Kings, princes, shahs, Caesars, and emperors, long live us. Until we meet again.